A seemingly perfect suburban family was shattered by lust, deception, and murder. That's according to a prosecutor who says an IRS criminal investigator lured a man into his home through a fetish website, orchestrating his wife's death. Well, the nation was stunned by what happened. But when the couple's Brazilian nanny was revealed as both his mistress and murder accomplice in this twisted plan, the true horror unfolded. So let's go behind the headlines and look into the dark psychology of this chilling double murder, where we learn how the nanny became an alleged shooter while the husband reportedly staged a fake home invasion before taking a life, or maybe two. Well, hey folks, welcome to Profiling Evil. If you've been following our work, you know that we dig into behavioral patterns, the kinds of things that define predatory crime. And we try to follow cases that haunt communities long after headlines fade. So hit that like and subscribe button down below. And please share Profiling Evil with your friends, people like you who care about understanding and preventing crime. Now today we're stepping into the upscale Virginia suburbs to explore a twisted tale of betrayal and bloodshed, one that rocked the true crime circles across the country. It was a supposedly respectful federal agent. It includes his trusting wife and their new Brazilian au pair, a nanny for this 4-year-old child that they have. Now, when the nanny and the husband fell in love, it reportedly led to the murder of a man who advertised his fetishes online. And we've got to keep in mind that Brendan Banfield is considered innocent until the day in which he's convicted, if that happens. That's the way it works here in the United States. But now, his one-time co-defendant, the nanny, is guilty of murder, and she's guilty of conspiring to commit murder. She pled guilty and is now a convict, working a sweet plea negotiation that she worked out to send her back to Brazil after she testifies against her one-time lover and the part that she played in the murder of Christine Banfield, the wife of the suspect, Brendan Banfield. Now, not only was Christine Banfield killed, but also a guy named Joseph Ryan. So let's look into this headline. It was the morning of February 24th, 2023. A chaotic 911 call came in from a young Brazilian au pair, someone who was working in Fairfax County, Virginia, and it pulled back the curtain on what appears to be a horrific home invasion gone wrong. But what police found wasn't just murder. It was a murder that was cloaked in layers of deceit. The homeowner's wife, Christine Banfield, lay fatally stabbed in the bedroom, while Joseph Ryan, a stranger, was dead from multiple gunshot wounds, one to the head and one to the chest. The husband, Brendan Banfield, was an IRS criminal investigator. He appeared shaken, but his nanny, Juliana Magalhães, and I probably didn't get her last name right, and I apologize, so I'm just going to call her Juliana after this, claimed that she also fired a weapon in self-defense. But as the investigation peeled back the timeline, the story began to unravel, and a shocking affair, a dark fetish, and cold-blooded planning came into light. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a blueprint for murder. The murder occurred in a neighborhood where the front yards are neatly cared for, where the sounds of children echo through cul-de-sacs, and where people lock their doors more out of habit than fear. But in February of 2023, the illusion of safety in the Banfield suburb was shattered. Brendan Banfield, again, appears to be this respected federal employee, his wife, a beloved pediatric nurse, their daughter, a little 4-year-old. and their live-in au pair, Juliana, was a Brazilian national who was entrusted with the care of the child and trusted in the family. But what unfolded inside that Herndon home wasn't just tragic. It wasn't just domestic violence. It was a calculated, cold-blooded double murder, one that prosecutors say was months in the making, fueled by lust, manipulation, and a shared descent into darkness. Christine Banfield was found by police stabbed to death in her bedroom. A stranger, a guy named Joseph Ryan, was lying nearby, shot twice. Now, police initially heard tales of an intruder, a brave defense by a husband, and chaos. But none of it was adding up. And soon, when they started looking at the testimony of people and the forensic evidence and the crime scene, well, the truth began to emerge, supported again by physical, forensic, and eventually confession. The storyline included a fetish website, a staged home invasion, and a disturbing pact between a husband and his lover, the au pair. That's right. It appears that Brendan Banfield and Juliana began an affair shortly after she came to work for the Banfields, sometime around August of 2022. And while the timeline has been pieced together through interviews and phone records and other evidence, eventually Juliana provided her own confession. And prosecutors believe this whole thing was more than just a casual entanglement. You see, by the fall of that year, Juliana and Brendan's relationship was shifting. What had begun as a flirtation allegedly spiraled into a full-blown sexual affair. And perhaps most disturbingly, before 2022 came to an end, it appears that Brendan was already laying the groundwork for something far more sinister, a murder. Now, as for Christine Banfield, there's no concrete evidence that she knew about the affair that the two were having. Prosecutors and friends say that she seemed unaware, going about her work at the pediatric clinic, sharing social media posts, and living what appeared to be a content domestic life. But clues began to mount that Brendan and Juliana were preparing to make the affair permanent. And they were going to do this by eliminating the one person standing in the way, Christine. And if you're like me, you're probably wondering if Christine Banfield sensed that something was going on. And if so, why would Christine allow the nanny to stay? I mean, I think a lot of you true crime followers are now used to spotting red flags and asking questions. So why did Christine allow this young, attractive au pair to stay under the same roof while her marriage was allegedly eroding? And the answer may simply lie in trust. Juliana had ingratiated herself into the family. And as far as Christine was concerned, a woman who was working long shifts, the presence of a caring child care provider seemed like a blessing, not a threat. But according to the arrest affidavit and plea negotiation documents, Brendan was actively manipulating both women. In messages and in conversations, he led Christine to believe that everything was normal, while behind the scenes, he was confiding in Juliana about his discontent, his desire, and eventually his deadly plans. Now, this is textbook grooming behavior, manipulating one victim while aligning another to serve a dark purpose. It's one of the patterns that we explore deeply in my book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, because it's how predators operate. They do it from within, cloaked with familiarity. And by the fall of 2023, prosecutors say that Brendan Banfield openly expressed his desire to get rid of his wife. And soon he began planning how to make that happen. Now, he had access to law enforcement tools. He knew the profession. He knew how the system worked. This wasn't just a man boiling over with rage. This thing appears premeditated. Then, Brendan somehow discovered a fetish website. Now, I don't know how, but this website had millions of users worldwide. The site bills itself as a community hub for people who are interested in everything from bondage to sexual role play. Now, while not inherently illegal or dangerous, it can attract those people who are interested in more extreme behaviors. In fact, we talk about this in my book, and we explore some of the differences between deviant and criminal behavior. Deviant being things that are just outside the norm, but criminal, violations of the law. Now, the prosecution alleges that Brendan created a fake profile on this fetish website, and it featured photos of his wife, Christine. He then, reportedly, acting as her, began catfishing or luring men to her profile. Now, he wasn't just trying to cheat, he was setting up a trap, according to prosecutors. And the man who became a victim in this case is a guy named Joseph Ryan, a 38-year-old guy from Springfield, Virginia. And this unlucky target reportedly played right into the trap, believing that he was actually talking with Christine. In this ultimate catfish, Ryan believes that he was being invited to a planned encounter with Christine, one that would involve role-playing with violence. And so he brought his knife to the scene. Now, Ryan was reportedly open about his lifestyle with his friends, and he actually told one of them, or at least one, that he was going to the Banfield home for what he believed would be a consensual hookup with a willing partner. But he wasn't the only person being lured, because according to prosecutors, Brendan was allegedly coaching Juliana every step of the way, having her train at a gun range, giving her a firearm, and even directing her to call Christine's phone when she witnessed Ryan entering the home, all part of this staged crime scene. Everything was staged to look like a home invasion gone wrong, all unfolding on the morning of February 24th, 2023. And according to Juliana's testimony and the affidavit, she left the house with Banfield's daughter around 7 a.m., allegedly heading to the zoo. But soon after, she returned, claiming that she forgot their lunch. Now, at first, she reported seeing an unfamiliar car near the driveway. This was Joseph Ryan's car. Concerned, she called Christine's mobile phone, but there was no answer on the phone. So her next desperate call was to Brendan. Now, she says she told him she was scared. Later, she apparently revealed that this was all part of their plan, because when Christine didn't answer that phone, they knew she wouldn't answer the phone. It had already been turned off and hidden in a kitchen drawer by Brendan before he left for work that morning. But you see, he wasn't at work when Juliana called. He was sitting in his car just a few blocks away at a nearby fast food restaurant parking lot, waiting for that call. And when the call came through, he raced to his home where he met Juliana and his daughter, and they entered the home through the basement, leaving that 4-year-old child downstairs. Now, this really makes me wonder if all this is accurate, how he normally would enter the house. Would he always enter through the basement? And it really makes me wonder if a trained police officer would have his nanny and his child go into a house where he believed an intruder or a lover had just entered. Well, regardless, he said that he and the nanny headed to the master bedroom where Ryan was with Christine. Now, she reported that she saw Ryan stabbing Christine. Armed with his service weapon and with Juliana in tow, he entered the bedroom, allegedly seeing the two together, and he shouted, "Police officer." He says seeing Ryan with a knife in his hands. Well, Ryan was immediately shot in the head. Then Juliana made that first 911 call, but apparently it was a little too soon because she hung up at Brendan's direction. Now, according to the 911 telephone call, Ryan could be heard in the background moaning. Hey folks, it's Mike from Profiling Evil, and I wanted to take a moment to invite you to join me at CrimeCon Denver. It's in September, and you won't want to miss this if you love true crime. and you love hanging out with people that like true crime, you ought to come and enjoy the 6,000 plus people that come to CrimeCon and take part in this amazing event. And to make it a little easier, I've worked out a deal with CrimeCon to give you a special discount on your registration. So when you go to registration, make sure you enter the code word KING, K-I-N-G, my last name, and that'll get you a discount on CrimeCon. And I look forward to seeing you there. Hey, by the way, bring your books, and I'll make sure to sign them while we're there, and we'll get some pictures together. Hey, we'll see you soon at CrimeCon. Now, the affidavit states that Brendan, after shooting Ryan in the head, allegedly stabbed Christine multiple times while Juliana stood nearby. Moments later, Juliana apparently notices that Ryan is still moving, so she shot him again, something that the medical examiner would later say was the fatal shot. Now, the prosecutor also says that Banfield and his lover staged the crime scene. After police arrived, Brendan, the ever-going strategist, went to the hospital with his dying wife, while Juliana, she went to police headquarters, carrying the traumatized child. Initially, Brendan and Juliana's story held, barely. They claimed that Ryan was an intruder. They were held as heroic defenders of the home, but forensic analysis was beginning to tell a different story. You see, as they looked at all the forms of evidence being collected, they noticed that there were no signs of forced entry into the home. Again, that would be supported by the fact that he was apparently coming there invited. But there was no evidence that Christine planned a fetish rendezvous. There was no history of knife play, bondage, or any other kind of similar practice on her end. And in October of 2023, everything changed. Police felt that they had enough evidence to charge Juliana with the murder of Christine and Ryan. And when they served the arrest warrant and the search warrant on Banfield's residence, they found Juliana living in the Banfield master bedroom with Brendan. Juliana's clothing was now hanging in Christine's closet. Her lingerie was tossed about the room. A framed photo of her and Brendan sat on the nightstand, just mere feet from where Christine had bled to death. It was, in one prosecutor's words, brazen. When friends and neighbors learned about this, they were horrified. What had looked like a tragedy now reeked of premeditation. And Brendan's background in law enforcement became a liability then, not a shield. You know, I spoke about this with Vinnie Politan on Court TV, particularly about the motivation Brendan and Juliana had to carry out this deadly plan. For me, it boiled down to a triangle of deceit. What initially looked like a tragic case of self-defense unraveled into something far darker, a premeditated, carefully staged double murder. And at the center was Brendan Banfield, and of course the nanny, Juliana. But the question I kept having was, who was in control, truly? And I think it's a question that continues to haunt this case, because on the surface, the motive seems painfully clear. Brendan, he wanted out of his marriage to Christine Banfield without going through a messy divorce. He wanted a life with his new lover, Juliana, and perhaps a shot at starting over with her, unburdened by a wife or a witness. But Juliana was the witness he needed to be the most concerned about. Now, there's a twist here. While prosecutors have portrayed Brendan as the driving force behind the plan, it's also possible that Juliana played a much more active role than anyone's given her credit for. I find myself asking, could it be that she wanted Christine gone and she wanted to fill her role? She used Brendan's desires, ego, maybe guilt to make it all happen. I'm left wondering whether she was really the pawn in all this or she was really the puppeteer. Now, it appears that Brendan created the fetish site profile using photos of Christine, and Ryan was lured to their home under this illusion that he was meeting Christine for consensual relationships, things involving rough sex. But this wasn't a fantasy session. It was a trap. And don't forget, Juliana was part of it. She even participated in a confirmation voice call with Ryan through the program Telegram in the days before the murder. And why? I mean, was she being coerced? Or was she an equal partner? Maybe even more frightening, was she the instigator? In her original statement, she said that she went to the safe during this assault to get a weapon, saying Ryan told her the combination and told her to go over there and get the other gun. Now, I don't know. Think about this. Do you believe that Brendan would be shouting the combination to a safe in the middle of this event? All the time, do you believe that she would be opening the safe while she's terrified? I mean, I think of the flight or fight syndrome, and I think she'd be running from the scene. So it's doubtful to me that he conditioned her to do his dirty work. It sounds more like they bonded over this dark fantasy. They rehearsed it for some time, and then they prepared, planned, and executed it, including buying phones before the murders, all suggesting premeditation and mutual coordination. So while it's easy to cast Brendan Banfield as the architect, I mean, he clearly had the motive, the weapons, the law enforcement knowledge, and the power of dynamics over Juliana, both as an older man and her employer. We have to think, is this just too simple of a narrative? Now, Juliana, with her youth, charm, and access, may have been the one who was actually planting the seeds, playing both the victim and the strategist. What if she not only seduced Brendan, but she enticed him into a scenario that ultimately benefited her the most? I mean, she's already struck a plea deal, and she holds the power of testimony in the upcoming trial. That's not just survival, that's strategy. This case could end up being about two people, equally dark, equally willing to destroy lives, and equally twisted in their desires. So whether it was the predator grooming the natty or the nanny who flipped the script, we may never know.
Mike King, I'll just begin with you because you've seen a lot, you've heard a lot. Just give me a number, 0 to 10. How sick and twisted is this alleged plot by this IRS agent?
Well, Vinny, I'll give you a 10 on that particular card. I mean, this is really terrifying to think that anyone would fantasize about something like this, spend the time planning something like this, either groom someone to help him or maybe was groomed by that someone to participate in something like this. And so what we really need to do in cases like this is we start breaking down all of the precipitating factors that led up to this homicide, then look at the homicides themselves, but most importantly, then evaluate the behavior during the event. And we see these criminals kind of go through this process of being organized, and then the crime starts unfolding and disorganization occurs. And we actually see that in this particular case, and we'll probably talk about that. But then the behavior after the event, because all of it really teaches us a whole lot more about what happened. It's more important to listen to the things that are not being said in a case like this than what's being said.
In the suburbs of Virginia, trying to hook up with some rando for some knife play?
Well, I mean, it certainly is going to be great fodder for the defense, I think, Vinny, because if they can continue to cast doubt on who was really writing that information and sending that information, that's one thing. But when you start putting the thing together in totality, when we have clear testimony, apparently, according to public reports, that Juliana is going to come forward and say, I made a phone call to Ryan and I told him I was Christine, well, there would be no reason for things like that to happen. They might be able to show through an IP address whether this originated on a device that Brendan had sole responsibility for, sole access to. But I mean, think about Chad Daybell taking over emails from his wife and sending Charles Vallow notes on those things. It would appear that the owner of that mobile device or that desktop device is sending the information. So for this to become a claim, I think is merely a way to say, hey, there's a question here that needs to be answered. And the police department certainly has to answer why those officers were transferred or moved. And sometimes, Vinny, you just do that because officers get tunnel vision in a case. And I always think of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle saying it is a capital mistake to theorize before you have facts, because you spend all your time twisting the facts to meet a theory. And that's not the kind of investigator we want out there. So I just am not as upset about that as maybe some people are. And then in September of 2024, Brendan Banfield was arrested, nearly a year after Juliana. But when he was arrested, the charges were severe. 2 counts of aggravated murder, 1 for his wife, 1 for Joseph Ryan. And prosecutors have laid out their theory plainly. They say Brendan orchestrated the entire crime. He used his law enforcement expertise to cover his tracks, and he manipulated Juliana into becoming both an accomplice and a pawn. Now, they allege he staged Christine's death to look like this defensive act, that he lured Ryan through that Fetish website, and that both victims were just collateral in his bid to start a new life with the au pair. And the nanny who took part in this thing, well, she made the sweetest deal on the planet with prosecutors. She flipped on Brendan because she was facing decades in prison herself. And as one local attorney put it, she was the first person in the candy store, and the prosecutors gave her a deal. So in October of 2024, she agreed to plead guilty to the involuntary manslaughter case and also a discharging firearm case inside the home. But in exchange, the murder charge was dropped. She received a potential sentence of just 10 years, much of which, in hopes of the prosecution, would be wiped away as time served. So depending on her cooperation in the upcoming trial against Brendan Banfield, she will turn state's evidence and probably within a day or two be on her way back to Brazil. So from an investigative standpoint, it's not uncommon for prosecutors to make deals with the lesser of two evils. That way they can take down the mastermind. But in this case, the evidence seems to support that Brandon truly did orchestrate nearly every deal. But this is a bitter pill, because a woman who also pulled the trigger, who also participated, who also set up both Christine and Ryan, is going to walk free. So without her testimony, Brendan's conviction would have been harder to secure, and we all get that. But holy cow, it still is a bitter pill to swallow. So the question becomes, how did these two get caught? Because usually it's not the cops. It's not even witnesses. It's the arrogance of the offender, this belief that they're smarter than the system, that they've covered every track, that they've deleted every message, that they've staged the crime scene just right. And I think that's what eventually brought Brendan and Juliana down. Not just what they did, but how they tried to clean up after. So at first glance, their story looked believable. A frantic 911 call, a wife stabbed, a man shot dead, a husband claiming to protect his family, a young nanny saying she witnessed it all. And for a moment, the illusion worked. But let me tell you what, this wasn't their first lie. And it wasn't their best one either. Because if we go back and look at that 911 call, you remember that Ryan was still alive at that point. In fact, the tapes apparently show him moaning in the background of that call. But that call was cut off quickly. And why? Because Brendan told Juliana to hang up. Now that was a mistake, a half-baked call that didn't match the panic that they were trying to portray. So then, the second 911 call, that one came after Christine Banfield had been stabbed to death by her husband. And I still wonder if she wasn't dead before Joseph Ryan ever showed up. Because I can't imagine we wouldn't have heard her screaming in the background when Ryan is heard moaning. Now, The story is that Joseph Ryan, this stranger, broke into the house, stabbed Christine. They were forced to shoot him. But the investigators started seeing the holes in this and the red flags. There was no forced entry, no signs of struggle. There was Christine's body being stabbed in a very close and personal way. Nothing like the defensive wounds you'd expect if someone interrupted an attack. Then, add to that the fake profile that Brendan created, and it's looking more and more like a setup. Christine didn't get Juliana's call because the phone had been turned off and stuffed in a drawer. And Brendan, the guy who was supposed to be at work like he does every other morning, well, he happened to be sitting in a fast food parking lot waiting for a phone call. This was theater, but it bombed terribly. Now, forensics also told another story. From the blood spatter to the defensive wounds and the staging of the bodies, all proof that this crime scene had been staged, backed up by forensic data and additional data that we haven't heard about that will certainly come in the way of phones and other kinds of forensic items. And then, almost like icing on the cake, when police served their warrants on Juliana, they found her moved into the master bedroom with Brendan, simply replacing Christine. And sitting right on that nightstand like a sick badge of conquest was a framed photo of Juliana and Brendan.
Mike King, he's an IRS agent. He has some training. He has time to allegedly, go through and figure this whole plot out. But the motivation seems pretty obvious on the nightstand.
Yeah, I think you're right, Vinny, and I think it's going to really play out heavily. He was somehow either smitten by her, or it was a plan from the beginning to be with the nanny and to have all of this happen. And so I think it's going to be really important. I keep going back to this idea of the thing that trips up most murderers. It isn't good police work or witnesses. It's the arrogance that they have, this belief that they somehow are smarter than the system or that they've covered every track. And so when I spoke earlier about this idea of coming into these crimes in an organized manner, but then once things start unfolding, when things start happening, and I have so many darn questions on this one, Vinny, because I'm not buying the timetable of when Christine dies versus when Ryan dies, and a whole bunch of other things. Just because of that 911 call, we can hear Ryan in the background, but we can't hear Christine, and I would think there would be a lot of screaming going on inside of that room. But we see this disorganization where Brendan stops that 911 call that first is made and tells her to hang up. And I see some little bit of fixing going on. But then the staging we learn about later, the blood spatter and the movement of the bodies. And all of this kind of points to this idea that they had a great plan in place, if in fact they're responsible for this murder, and that it fell apart in the course of committing the homicides. So we see him going from organized to disorganized and starting to make big mistakes that people like you that were prosecuting cases like this would have been able to take advantage of. And I think that's what we're going to see come out in this court case.
Yeah.
Well, folks, I'd like to know your thoughts on this plea deal and whether or not you think Juliana is a victim of Brendan or a predator who took advantage of his lack of control. Hey, please put your comments down below and be constructive in your critiques. Now, this case leaves me with more questions than answers. Things like, how does a man with a federal badge manipulate not one, but two people into a coordinated murder? How does he trust that the one witness, Juliana, would not turn on him? How does someone balance fatherhood, a career in law enforcement, and secret affairs while planning a double homicide? And were there warning signs that were missed? Now, this case is more than a tragic murder case. I mean, this is a master's class in manipulation, coercion, and the psychology of predation. I mean, think about it. If all of this is true, Brendan Banfield wasn't just a husband having an affair. He was grooming both his wife to be a victim and his nanny, isolating them both emotionally, compartmentalizing lies, and preparing one to become disposed of as a victim and the other as a killer. It's cold, it's calculated, and it's disturbingly familiar. Because I talk about it in my book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. I lay out exactly how predators like this operate. In fact, in one chapter, we explore the criminal mindset of how offenders justify unspeakable acts in their minds before they ever lift a finger. We think about Brendan's fantasies, and they didn't just start on that fetish website. They were already rooted in a belief that he was smarter than anybody else, and he was entitled to act on his darkest impulses. In another chapter, I teach readers how to recognize grooming behavior, not just in the traditional predator-victim dynamic, but in manipulative relationships where trust is weaponized, because that's exactly what happened with Juliana. She was groomed to become a co-conspirator, not just a caretaker. Or she groomed him. In Chapter 11, I unpack the role of fantasy, escalation, especially escalation when it's fueled by online personas and dark web activity. Brendan's use of this fetish website to lure Joseph Ryan wasn't spontaneous. It was part of a fantasy script to turn into a criminal blueprint. These platforms become breeding grounds for boundary pushing and desensitization. So I try to teach you what signs to look for. In another chapter, we dive deep into situational awareness and personal safety, the kinds of behavioral clues and signals that can help you spot danger before it finds you. In this case, Christine never saw it coming, or she ignored the red flags when she did see them. But you can learn what some people miss. So if you're left shaken by this story, and I know I am, don't just walk away. Equip yourselves. Get Wolves in Sheep's Clothing isn't just a book. It's a field guide for surviving in a world where the most dangerous predators don't wear masks. They wear wedding rings, badges, maybe even smiles. So pick up a copy of Wolves in Sheep's Clothing today. It's available in paperback, hardbound, ebook, and audiobook. And if you live in the United States, you can get signed editions that you can purchase through profilingevil.com. I'll sign them and I'll ship them to you for free. Anywhere else in the world, just go to amazon.com. And please watch for Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And don't forget about Profiling Evil's audio podcasts. They're available on your favorite podcast platform, and it is a great way to get your crime on the go. So thanks again for listening to Profiling Evil. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up and share us with your friends. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.